The police raid further properties in the hunt for a terror network, and the nation falls silent to remember those injured and killed in Manchester. The bomb disposal squad searched a house in Wigan tonight, part of the ongoing investigation by the police.
The arrests that we have made are significant, and initial searches of premises have revealed items that we believe are very important to the investigation.
All 22 people killed in the bombing have now been identified. 10 are teenagers and children.
So you come especially for the concert, did you?
Yeah.
The Queen visits some of the injured in hospital. And the UK agrees to resume intelligence sharing with the US after condemnation of leaked information appearing in American newspapers. Also tonight, Donald Trump makes sure he's centre stage as he calls on NATO members to pay their full share.
Please, let's be respectful.
Tempers rise as UKIP implies Theresa May bears some responsibility for Monday's bombing. And celebrating the Lisbon Lions. It's 50 years since Celtic became the first British side to win the European Cup.
Coming up in Sports Day later in the hour on BBC News, there's another managerial departure. Marco Silva has left relegated Hull City and he's favourite to take over at Crystal Palace.
Good evening. A minute's silence fell across the UK at 11 this morning to remember the 22 people killed in Manchester. Shortly after, the Queen visited some of those in hospital being treated for their injuries. The police bomb disposal squad has been searching a property in Wigan tonight. Part of an ongoing series of raids as the police tried to establish who might have helped Salman Abedi carry out the attack on Monday night. There's continued criticism of the leaking of sensitive evidence to the US media. The American President, Donald Trump, has described it as deeply troubling. More on all of that in a moment. But first, our chief correspondent, Gavin Hewitt, on the minute's silence that united the people of Manchester with the rest of the country.
In the minutes before the silence, thousands headed to the squares, the open spaces, the office doorways. A moment for a wounded community to reflect, to remember, to stand together. In Manchester, a long minute ended with applause.
Well, it was really beautiful, and I thought it was so nice everyone coming here and showing the respects.
Today has been a time to reflect and a time of remembrance, and at the same time to show strength and unity and our support to those who've lost their loved ones.
I've come here to pay tribute to those who were so courageous that night, those who lost their lives and those who are still fighting for their lives.
He was the first on the scene as a paramedic from our ambulance.
During the morning, the Queen visited the Royal Manchester Children's Hospital.
So you happened to be the first one, were you?
I was from the ambulance service.
She thanked the medical staff who had attended the scene of the attack and spoke to some of those wounded.
You had enjoyed the concert, presumably?
Yeah, it was really good.
Was it?
Yeah. I got to meet her before the concert as well. She was lovely.
Really?
Yeah.
Did you?
In one conversation, she described the attack as wicked.
Big shock. Really big shock.
Very wicked.
Another patient spoke about her shrapnel wounds.
Absolutely dreadful.
Mine's gone through 15 centimetres out the other side, so I'm due surgery later on this afternoon. So.
75 people are still in hospital, and some of them will need reconstructive surgery. Today was a reminder of what unites people, a determination not to allow Monday's bombing to define this city and its communities, even while people are still seeking answers as to how a young man born here could carry out such an attack. This evening, hundreds of people were still laying flowers, a day of solidarity after the deliberate targeting of children and teenagers. Gavin Hewitt, BBC News, Manchester.
Well, in their latest update, Greater Manchester Police say that they've made significant arrests and have found items of great importance. Since the suicide bombing on Monday night, the police and security services have been trying to establish whether Salman Abedi was part of a wider terror network. Our home editor, Mark Easton, has the latest on the investigation.
This evening, the police hunt for Salman Abedi's bomb factory took a new turn. The search of a house in Wigan suddenly escalated with the discovery of suspicious items, and the bomb squad were called to the scene. Local families were evacuated as a robot, often used to defuse roadside bombs in war zones, was deployed on a residential home in Greater Manchester.
I share a wall with the guy who was arrested. If there's something inside and my valuables get destroyed.
You're literally in the neighbouring room.
Yeah.
I didn't expect that something of this sort can happen so close to us. It is really shocking.
Police have described their investigation as fast-moving. This morning, as the country stood in silence, armed police officers were shouting at residents in central Manchester to take cover after reports of a suspect package in a block of flats.
There was all the armed police officers in the middle of the grass just squatting down, and they were just shouting at everyone, telling them don't go near the road.
I panicked because my daughter was in the school that is just there. The first instinct is I need my child.
The city is jittery as counter-terrorism chiefs desperately try to track the movements of Salman Abedi. This is what the search for a bomb factory looks like. A tip-off, an address, a raid, and on this occasion, an arrest. But the search for that factory still goes on. This raid did not produce the lead they'd hoped for, but the investigation is understood to be making real progress. 2 arrests were made in Manchester early today, and there was a linked swoop on a property 75 miles south in Nuneaton late last night, where another man was arrested. 8 men are now in custody in connection with the arena bombing.
I want to reassure people that the arrests that we have made are significant, and initial searches of premises have revealed items that we believe are very important to the investigation.
Police and counter-terrorism officers are piecing together a picture of Salman Abedi's last movements. It's understood he'd recently left Manchester for Tripoli in Libya, returning to the UK 4 days before the attack via Istanbul and Dusseldorf airports. Police think in the hours before the bombing he may have been at a property in Granby Row near Piccadilly railway station and a short distance from the Manchester Arena where the bomb exploded. Somewhere near here, he'd phoned his mother and said, "Forgive me," according to a Libyan anti-terrorism official. But who else did he talk to? Where else had Abedi been? Forensics, CCTV, traffic cameras, interviews, every conceivable method for tracking Abedi's movements is being pursued.
We have been overwhelmed with support from members of the public, and I'd ask for patience to continue from our local communities here in Greater Manchester as we carry out those searches and this investigation.
There are nagging questions, though. Abedi was known to security services. There had been warnings about his radicalisation. Why wasn't he stopped before he carried out his murderous attack? Since 2013, 18 plots have been thwarted, 5 since the Westminster attack in March. should this one have been prevented too? Mark Easton, BBC News, Manchester.
Well, let's get more from our Home Affairs correspondent Daniel Sanford, who's outside the headquarters of Greater Manchester Police. Daniel, we saw in Mark Easton's piece there a series of raids and searches being carried out by the police today. What's the latest you're hearing from there?
Well, first of all, Fiona, it's worth saying that raid in Wigan, where the bomb disposal officers were called, does appear to be over. People have been allowed to return back to their homes, and nothing dangerous seems to have been found, though. So that particular incident does seem to have been resolved safely. On the wider investigation, I got the sense for the first 36 hours or so that detectives are really stuck in the long grass, struggling to make progress. I think that has really changed in the last 24 hours. I get the sense that they know very much who the bomber is, when he arrived in the country, where he spent the weekend before the attack. They've got an idea about his associates and even maybe who knew what he was planning to do. And I think that is all looking quite good at the moment. I think the shadow hanging over the whole thing is the threat level, which remains at critical, which means there's an assessment that an attack is possibly imminent. And there's a reason for that. One source said to me that there's regarded to be still a very high risk, a high threat. And when I asked what that meant, they said, well, the problem is we've got what he called outstanding entities. And I think we can start to assume that means there are bits of a bomb or things that you might use to put a bomb together that are still missing.
Daniel Sanford, thank you. All 22 people who lost their lives in the suicide bombing have now been identified. 10 teenagers and children were among those who were killed, the youngest just 8. Judith Morris reports now on the victims and the loss felt by their families and friends.
They were loved and they are mourned. Taken by the bomb, their names keep coming. Ailey MacLeod, 14 years old, from the Outer Hebrides, a vivacious teenager who played the bagpipes and was full of fun. 19-year-old Courtney Boyle from Gateshead, a university student who'd made her family proud. Courtney's mother has suffered double heartache because her partner, Philip Tron, was killed too. Described as gorgeous and crazy, it's said he made the world a happy place. Also lost, Wendy Fowle from Otley near Leeds, a mum and a school helper, said to have touched the lives of so many. Wendy and her friend Caroline had been together collecting their children from the concert. Injured herself, Caroline remembers being frantic with worry.
I couldn't see Wendy anywhere. And then got I think it was a policeman talking to me and got me sat up and then asked me if I could walk. We tried ringing Wendy straight away when we got outside and her phone just rang and rang and rang.
17-year-old Chloe Rutherford from South Shields was studying music and planned a career in travel. She was at the show with her boyfriend, Liam Curry. 19-year-old Liam lost his father to cancer earlier this year. He and Chloe were young sweethearts, described as inseparable. Their families say the teenagers' wings were ready, but their hearts are not. And Elaine McIver, a police officer who loved music and had gone to the concert on her night off duty. Flowers have been laid at Cheshire Police headquarters for Elaine, who started as a volunteer special constable and rose up to work for the organised crime unit. Elaine McIver spent more than 20 years working for Cheshire Police. Her colleagues and friends came into work to learn that they'd lost one of their own. Cheshire's Chief Constable opened a book of condolence for the officer.
I think it's rocked the core of the organisation in all sorts of different ways, and we've been really touched by the outpouring of support from the wider police family, from other organisations that we work with, and indeed messages from the public of Cheshire, which has been really warming at such a difficult time.
So many communities are bereft. In Bury, north of Manchester, hundreds turned out tonight, riding in convoy into the city centre. They came to remember their friend Olivia Campbell, and her family came too, taking comfort from the tributes left for all of the victims. 22 killed, more than 100 injured. We know their names and their harrowing stories, but we will never understand their terrible, unfathomable loss. Judith Moritz, BBC News, Cheshire.
Well, today, police in Manchester condemned the continuing leaks in the United States of information about their investigation into the attack. The publication of images by the New York Times of the scenes of the attack prompted Greater Manchester Police to temporarily suspend intelligence sharing between Britain and the US. It was only resumed in the last hour. Theresa May has discussed the issue with the President, who's described it as deeply troubling. Both are attending a NATO summit in Brussels. Our Deputy Political Editor John Pienaar reports from there.
A flying visit by Theresa May, straight from the British front in the struggle against terrorism, here to build alliances with partners and repair them with the biggest one of all. She wanted more cooperation against terrorism and no more damage to investigations, like the leaks of intelligence by American officials after the Manchester attack.
We have a special relationship with the USA. It is our deepest defence and security partnership that we have. Of course, that partnership is built on trust. And part of that trust is knowing that intelligence can be shared confidently. And I will be making clear to President Trump today that intelligence that is shared between law enforcement agencies must remain secure. Thank you.
These images of bomb debris after the blast were leaked to the US media by American officials. So was the bomber's identity. British officials were furious at the leaks, and the story dogged President Trump. No answer yet, but at a ceremony for NATO leaders, he led a moment's silence.
Innocent little girls and so many others were horribly murdered. It was a barbaric and vicious attack upon our civilization. All people who cherish life must unite in finding, exposing, and removing these killers and extremists. And yes, losers. They are losers.
But leaders were forced to listen as the president gave them a severe telling off over missed targets for defense spending.
But 23 of the 28 member nations are still not paying what they should be paying and what they are supposed to be paying for their defense. This is not fair to the people and taxpayers of the United States.
No doubt about who considered himself the alpha leader here. But Mrs May had mentioned the importance of sharing intelligence, and those Manchester leaks rankled. The president released a statement calling the leaks deeply troubling and promising to bring anyone found responsible to justice. Facing terrorism, confronting other challenges, Britain needs its so-called special relationship with America to be just that. But those leaks caused fury. Trust was damaged just when it was most needed. And now, American promises to do better in future may ease the tension. Mrs May and her ministers have no choice but to accept them anyway. But fully repairing the lost trust and confidence, that'll take time. This evening, solidarity's on show, with President Trump, of course, centre stage. There'll be more help for operations against Islamic State, more British help training troops in Afghanistan. Leaders want to be seen working together, but Theresa May wants more cooperation against the threats that face them all. John Pienaar, BBC News, Brussels.
Our North America editor John Sopel is in Sicily, where Mr Trump is due to arrive next. So, John, the police here say they've resumed intelligence sharing with their American counterparts. But how serious has this disagreement been between the UK and the US?
Serious. I think that Theresa May and the British government left the Americans in absolutely no doubt just the scale of the fury that they felt that things like that were appearing in American newspapers. And I thought the statement from Donald Trump that came out was very strong indeed, saying, I'm asking the Department of Justice and other relevant agencies to launch a complete review. If appropriate, the culprit should be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. And then, kind of to put some balm on the situation, there is no relationship we cherish cherish more than the special relationship between the United States and the United Kingdom. Donald Trump was not standing up for his security agencies because he believes that he has been the victim of their leaks in the past, and now he's saying to Theresa May, in effect, you now know how I feel about what's going on in America with all these leaks. That said, Fiona, there were one or two White House people I spoke to who said, I'm not sure I understand what all the fuss is about. And that points to a different culture in the US compared to the UK. Our contempt of court laws in Britain are very different from America. What has appeared in American newspapers seems to probably the journalists and perhaps the law officer who leaked them pretty unremarkable. We have very different systems of justice, but today Britain showed that it can really bare its teeth and show its unhappiness, and America has responded.
John Sopel in Sicily, thank you. Well, there was a partial resumption of campaigning in the general election as the leader of UKIP, Paul Nuttall, launched the party's manifesto. But it was overshadowed by the party's accusation that Theresa May bore some responsibility for the Manchester bombing. The Home Secretary, Amber Rudd, said it was not the time to make political points. Our political editor, Laura Kuensberg, reports.
Manchester on everyone's minds. But UKIP's manifesto was hardly a quiet affair. The party accusing Theresa May of playing a part in creating the circumstances that led to Monday's attack.
The Prime Minister has, during her time in high office, presided over cuts to our police service and reductions in our armed forces too. It is also a dereliction of duty to allow jihadis to return to this country.
He's promising thousands of extra police, soldiers and border guards. But his supporters jeered reporters questioning the party's claims.
Ask a sensible question.
It sounds like you're near as damn it blaming the Prime Minister for this attack and the circumstances that led to it.
Roll back down your hole. Don't you understand English? Very stupid question.
But as for blaming her personally for the attack, absolutely not. I'm not doing that. What I am saying is that the politicians in this country are too cowardly at the moment to actually face up to what the real issue is.
Yet the Deputy Chair did say Theresa May must bear some responsibility.
I think all politicians who voted for the reduction of spending in the security services and indeed with the police have to bear some sort of responsibility.
So the Prime Minister, in your view, must bear some responsibility. That's what you've just said.
Hang on. All politicians who voted for a reduction on spending in security services and indeed the police must look at themselves in the mirror.
UKIP's been struggling to keep pace since the EU vote last year. But in Clacton today, the only place ever to choose a UKIP MP, today's tougher approach on extremism did find some favour.
I think all the borders need to be closed off at the minute.
They can't check on everybody. They're cutting down the police force, the army and everything like that.
Stop the jaw and do more.
Yet for other politicians, it's just too soon.
I think it's entirely the wrong approach. What we're trying to do now is support the police, the intelligence services and of course the victims. We need to make sure that they get all the support they need. This is not a time for making political points.
You are feeding the fears that are causing the problems in this country today.
No, John.
There's a connection to Manchester.
UKIP deliberately wants to be seen as the party that's ready to say the unsayable. Out first on the stump today since the Manchester attack. But challenging extremism has been notably absent from the election. Not anymore.
Thank you.
But voters have been moving away from UKIP. Today's figures show immigration is down, mainly due to fewer EU citizens moving here and more packing their bags. And of course, we are all on our way out of the EU. Perhaps UKIP today is just trying to keep up.
So, Laura, election campaigning just resuming, and already so too are the personal attacks.
Well, Fiona, the context really of all of this has changed, and into this new frame, Jeremy Corbyn will step tomorrow with his first major campaign as things nationally get back underway. And he will make a speech about his values and British values and his own version of patriotism, and he will praise fulsomely the work of the emergency services in Manchester, and he'll promise also to restore the cuts that have been made to police budgets. But he will go further than that. He will talk about foreign policies too. And he will state his view that the war on terror has failed and that our foreign policy abroad has, rather than reducing the threat to us here at home, it has actually made it more dangerous. Now, he will absolutely explicitly say this does not justify the actions of any individual terrorist. It does not justify the horror of what happened in Manchester this week. But he will be quite clear that in his view, Britain's wars abroad have made things more, not less dangerous. Now, his team is well aware that this is a controversial argument to make right now when the reality of what's happened is still so raw. But of course, it's not the first time that Jeremy Corbyn has made this case. He's held this belief for quite some time. Nonetheless, they are prepared, I think, for a barrage of criticism tomorrow when he gives this speech. But those people around Jeremy Corbyn and Jeremy Corbyn himself, I think, believe that it would be dishonest, perhaps, and certainly not giving a full picture to have a proper debate about why this happened and how it could be prevented in future without looking at the whole situation. And for them, that includes Britain's wars abroad.
Laura Koonsberg at Westminster, thank you. Let's take a brief look at some of the day's other news stories. The former ITV weather presenter Fred Talbot has been found guilty of indecently assaulting 7 boys in the 1970s and 80s. At the time, Talbot was a teacher at a grammar school in Greater Manchester. The assaults happened on camping and boating trips in Scotland. Talbot, previously jailed for 5 years for 2 other assaults, will be sentenced next month. The Court of Appeal has ruled that doctors can stop providing life support treatment to a 9-month-old baby who has a rare genetic illness. Charlie Gard's parents raised more than £1 million to take him to America for experimental treatment. But the judges agreed with Great Ormond Street Hospital in London that it was in Charlie's best interest to give him only palliative care. Conservative plans to give a free breakfast to every primary school child in England could cost 3 times more than the party is estimating. Independent experts say the manifesto pledge of £60 million doesn't take into account all the different costs involved. Let's go back to our main story in the Manchester attack. The sudden wave of casualties rushed into 8 hospitals on Monday night across Greater Manchester put the health service under intense pressure. But off-duty medical staff rushed in to help those already on duty treat the injured. Our reporter Seema Katecha has been speaking to one of the nurses who worked through that night.
When we found out it was a children's concert, it was, you know, I'm a mum. I've got kids, you know, daughters, etc. We've been to concerts, we've been to the MEN. And to know that they were frightened, to know that people were lost, to know that my colleagues from the, you know, the emergency services that were on scene, were, to see what we saw by the time they came here, to know that they were dealing with that at the scene, it really makes your blood run cold.
Charlotte was on duty the night a bomb ripped through Manchester Arena. She was working at Stepping Hill Hospital, one of 8 in the region that took in patients.
My job on that night is to ensure the safety and well-being of the patients and the staff, ensuring that everybody had what they needed to be able to care for the patients that we were coming in.
It was only hours later the enormity of what happened began to sink in.
I cried a lot when I got home. For the people that I knew whose lives had been taken. I cried a lot for the people whose lives had been changed in ways that they could never go back to normal after this. I cried for the potential, you know, my children, what does their future, you know, what is it for them? Do they need to be frightened going to school tomorrow?
Hospital staff here have support available, someone to talk to when it gets too much. Even though this is what they're hired to do, the full impact of what they've witnessed is yet to be felt.
The atrocity that they saw that night, I know they close their eyes and they see those pictures, and as do I, and trying to get that out of your head when you need to come back to work the next day, it's difficult. It's really hard.
That was Charlotte Brownhill there speaking to our reporter Seema Katecha. And finally, 50 years ago today, Celtic became the first British football club to win the European Cup. The team became known as the Lisbon Lions. As our special correspondent Anna Little reports, that victory in Portugal still carries a symbolic importance that extends well beyond football.
The home movie is 50 years old. It captures a moment in history far, far weightier than a simple sporting victory.
Never been on a plane. Nope, I had to go and get a temporary passport.
Jim McGuckin was at the match. He shot these pictures. Celtic was founded 130 years ago as the team of Glasgow's large Irish Catholic population. It still finds its most loyal support there. For decades, that community suffered systematic workplace discrimination in a Scotland still shaped by its Protestantism.
It was like Scotland's dirty little secret that was never quite spoken about, but everybody knew that it was there.
The 1967 European Cup final coincided with a moment when Scotland and this community's place in it began to change.
This is a narrative throughout a whole generation of young Celtic supporters who grew up and said, those men there are symbols, you know, and we look up to them and say, we can be, and not necessarily as football players, you know, but we can emulate them in other ways and in other walks of life, and that's what we all grew up wanting to do.
Inter Milan kicked off, and in a continental near heatwave.
Celtic went to Lisbon to take on the mighty Inter Milan. The team carried the hopes of a community shaped by a shared adversity. 50 years on, this place, Celtic Park, remains a focus of collective memory and identity.
I was born 9 months and 3 days later. So, you know, read into that what you may.
So you're a Lisbon baby?
I am absolutely a child of Lisbon, and I feel really proud about that because our family, our environment, our community was very much based around that platform. You know, so I look at footage of Lisbon and I almost feel part of it, even though I know I wasn't there, but I look at it and feel that that's my story.
At the final whistle, the score was 2-1. Celtic became the first British club to win the European Cup. In the decades that lay ahead, Scotland's Irish Catholics would emerge from their entrenched disadvantage and inequality. Scotland's leading historian is himself from an Irish Catholic background.
We weren't exactly an underclass, but we were pretty close to it. This team was the sporting champion of that ethnicity. That was probably almost as significant as the visit of the Pope to Scotland, first ever visit of the Pope of 1982. It was, if you like, a stage in their emancipation.
And that is why these flickering images resonate so powerfully half a century on. Alan Little, BBC News, Glasgow.
Newsnight's coming up on BBC Two. Here's Kirsty.
Tonight, Jeremy Corbyn restarts the election campaign with an attack on foreign policy, which he says fuels rather than fights terrorism. The war on terror is not working, according to the Labour leader. We're examining that now on BBC Two.
Meanwhile, here on BBC One, it's time for the news where you are. Bye-bye.